Greetings, and thanks for tuning in for this week's edition of Capitol Week with David Owen. For those keeping score at home, today marks the 25th legislative day of the 96th legislative session. I'm Dirk Lammers of Center of Services, joined once again by David Owen, president of the South Dakota Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Welcome, David. Tell us about this week's view of the state capitol.
I thought after 26 degrees below zero and snow everywhere, we could use a sign of hope, and so we've chosen the external view of the Capitol. Granted, it's either spring or fall. Things look kind of dead, but they look a whole lot better than they did last week when we were up there for real.
Last week was host your annual business day at the legislature. That was Wednesday, and that featured presentations from Ron Wirtz of the Minneapolis Fed, John Kirchner of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem. David, give us a brief summary of the festivities.
Well, we couldn't gather in Pier this year because of the COVID, so we had about 75. We did it as a virtual event. We had about 75 people join us online and about a dozen or so in the room at the Ramkota, so we had a live audience feel. We do Business Day in a couple of segments. Actually three. We usually have an evening banquet and a reception. That didn't seem safe. And we didn't want to ask members and board members to travel across the state if we weren't going to do a mixer with all the legislators, and doing a mixer with all the legislators didn't seem like it's appropriate this year. So there was no evening function. The other two functions are our business briefing, issue briefing / business caucus, and then the presentations that you've outlined. So business caucus, we ask the assembled crowd, in this case mostly online, about 20 questions. We go through the business and issues that the legislature is discussing, and then we ask our own members and audience to ring in and provide their votes. They're then taken up to all legislators, the governor's staff, constitutional offices, and they hear from the only business caucus that happens during any legislative session.
Excellent. And with that, of course, we have these questions. You get the kind of this straw poll of your members, instant feedback. So let's take a look at some of those.
We asked about 20 questions, and no podcast can survive that. So we have culled it down to maybe 4 of the most interesting. We're going to talk about and see the answers on electric cars, buying marijuana, betting on sports teams, and whether or not there ought to be a supermajority on ballot measures. Dirk?
Well, let's start with this first one. Should all electric vehicles be assessed some kind of fee to pay for road construction and repair? And you got 3 choices there. I'll summarize them to, of course, no, leave them alone, or until some kind of meter works when charging at home.
Let's look at the answers. I'm going to move in here a little bit. We had 68 people answer this question. 52 of them, 76%, thought the bill was a good idea. This question is based, of course, on House Bill 1053 that we've been talking about. So we have 52 or 76% yes. No was only 7 votes, 10%. And then that third answer that says, until there's something better, this is a good start, which got 9 votes or 13%. So when you look at the people leaning forward on taxing electric cars, something for road work, we are actually at about 90% approval.
All right, our second question's on marijuana. What are your thoughts about how marijuana should be sold? You gave your people 5 choices here, so ranging from very few dispensaries, open limited hours, down to doesn't matter, my old dealer is staying open.
We just asked about buying marijuana. We did not distinguish between medical and recreational, in part because recreational is in the court system. So the idea that we're now going to be able to buy marijuana, the results were really interesting. Very few dispensaries, very limited, got 26 votes or 35%. I make a joke that says, if you ask my board, there'd be 1 dispensary in a town, it would open at noon and close at 12:15. Allowing cities to decide, the second answer to that, which would make local control the issue, had 27 votes or 36%. The idea of having anybody that cards people. There's a bill in the legislature that would allow convenience stores or people with a malt liquor license. They're used to asking to see the ID, and that's the idea. That only garnered 16 votes, or 21%, and there was one person that chose the last answer.
And good for him on that. Let's go to our next question. How should people be allowed to place bets on teams and sports games? And, we're talking about doing it only in the city of Deadwood, in bars, restaurants, and convenience stores across the state, and nowhere, or even places that sell lotto tickets. Let's take a look at how things paired out on this one.
This is kind of interesting because I think this is one case where a good portion of the business community is at a different place than the governor is. And I was mildly surprised at the results. Let me look in again. We had 72 of about 91 people betting on this, and Deadwood only took exactly half of the votes, 36 votes. Of course, that matches Senate Bill 44, the governor's bill. The second one got 15 votes, and that is to put them in restaurants and bars that have a full liquor license. So you'd have to be in that bar, but you could be in your own hometown, betting on your own team or against the Vikings or whatever you want to do. The idea that it would be connected to the lotto system garnered nothing, 0 votes. The idea that we would have this with convenience stores and lotto tickets is got 14 votes, or about 20%.
Also asked a question on that ballot measure that would change the vote structure for future initiatives. And the question was posed: when a ballot measure increases taxes or fees or allocates more than $10 million, what level of voter approval should be required? And you would ask about 50%, 55, or a supermajority of 60. Let's take a look at how this came out.
This tells me that the promoters of this idea, the Americans for Prosperity, and some other groups, have a sense of, at least maybe perhaps the wider business community, the strongest support went to that final option, which is proposed in the House Joint Resolution making its way through the session. 29 votes, or 46%, voted for that. The second one, a simple majority, should continue to be the way we make ballot measure decisions, had 20 votes, 31%, and someplace in the middle. We went through this before when the idea of having a supermajority for constitutional amendments was floated. That was initially 60, and the sponsor of that one went down to 55. So that middle answer is the middle approach, and about 55%. Only got 14 votes, but that's about 22%.
Okay, well, let's return back to the legislature and check on a few bills. We've talked a lot about HB 1046, which would limit liability for certain exposures to COVID-19. I believe you have an update on this one.
And this will be the final update on House Bill 1046. It was signed by the governor, so it passed the House, passed the Senate, and now has been signed by the governor. That means it becomes law on July 1st, 2021. I'll add a footnote to this. You mentioned we'd heard in Business Day from John Kirchner from the U.S. Chamber. He's out of the Minneapolis office. He got talking about the federal version of this bill, and the U.S. Chamber has heard from some of its members around the country, and there's already lawsuits being filed. Interestingly enough, he made reference to some members that are being sued because they forced people to wear masks and personal protective equipment, in a similar fashion that other members have been sued because they didn't provide enough. So I think we have found a good answer with this bill that will really talk about only suing when there's something egregiously wrong.
Let's take a look at HB 1100. This legislation would delay by a year implementation of the medical marijuana program that was approved by the vast majority of South Dakota voters in November and was set to take effect July 1st. Last Wednesday, HB 1100 emerged from the House State Affairs Committee on a 10-3 vote. So if that means, if my math is right, 77% of the committee voted against nearly 70% of the electorate?
If not directly against the electorate, certainly running the potential of disappointing 70% of the electorate. But keep in mind, Dirk, it did lose in 3 counties. We have 66 counties, and the 3 of the lost, nobody lives in. The governor has argued, and legislative leadership tends to agree, that this is so complicated. 29, I believe, sections of law spread over 20 pages. It's now been codified in Chapter 34, that to really define who can give out marijuana cards, to really know how we're going to structure dispensaries. Keep in mind, medical marijuana is not a prescription. So pharmacies aren't going to deal with it. The law requires medical professionals to give out the cards, but things kind of get murky after that. The governor just wants to take about as much time as other states have taken, which amounts to another year. I will agree with your fairly cryptic comment that the combination of going after Amendment A and then slowing this down by a year makes it look like the established power structure is putting this on the slow train. So someplace between being cautious and just resisting, I think we're going to see a lot of discussions. The other thing that I'll tell you, medical marijuana, when we can get it, is going to be the same as an over-the-counter drug. So one of the questions we have to sort out is, what kind of tax structure do we have if nothing else is done? It seems to me, and I've talked to the Secretary of Revenue, who tends to agree that it will be counted as an over-the-counter drug and taxed with the sales and use tax, 4.5% state and up to 2% locally. So we have a long way to go, but rest assured, I have talked to legislative leadership. There's also a sensitivity about Dirk's concern, and I don't think you're going to see them trying to take away medical marijuana. Some of these people sincerely think it's going to take that much time.
Thank you for that update. Now, the House Commerce and Energy Committee took a much more chill approach on HB 1203, which would authorize banks to engage in business with industrial hemp or marijuana licensees and associated persons. What's the aim of that bill?
Nationwide, when states have legalized marijuana, they've created a problem because marijuana is still illegal by federal law. So banks that are regulated by federal law have not been able in other states and until I think recently to be able to engage in business with dispensaries and other businesses that are dealing in marijuana. House Bill 1203 was put together by the Bankers Association, and it is creating a structure that will allow banks to at least do some of the financial transactions and offer traditional banking services to some of the businesses involved in both medical marijuana and, when it's time, or if it's time, recreational marijuana. So it's a state regulation that will keep banks, we want those businesses to have regular banking relationships. It just gets complicated and kind of weird. Not that things don't get weird anyway. But this is a good bill. The chamber will proudly support. I don't think it's going to have a lot of trouble. But it comes back to that reminder. The voters want to make marijuana legal. That's a whole package of bills that we have to get changed. One of the ones we've been giggling about is this one that makes it illegal to be in a car smoking or using marijuana. Why wasn't that illegal? Because the drug was. And if the drug's going to be legal now, we got to clearly set a law that says don't be passing a bong around a car.
And we haven't got to the bong on the horse bill. I don't know if that's going to come in some year after some weird court case, but we'll have to wait and see on that one, I guess.
As long as you don't share it with the horse can get you home.
Okay. Looking at the legislative calendar, which hangs here in our Capitol Week studios, I see that coming this Thursday is Crossover Day. Now, for those who don't celebrate this very special holiday, please give us an overview and perhaps some gift ideas.
Crossover Day is the point at which all bills have to be out of their House of origin. So all House bills have to be out of the House of Representatives and over in the Senate. Likewise, all Senate bills have to be through committee and have been voted on by the Senate and over getting referred to a House committee. Some states call it transmittal deadline. So you'd think that would happen about halfway through the session. But about 50% of the bills get killed around here, and the majority of the ones that get killed in committee of the first House, of the House of origin. So by Thursday, which only leaves us 2 weeks, all bills have to clear the House of origin and literally cross over the rotunda to the other house.
Thanks for joining us for this week's edition of Capitol Week with David Owen. Remember to join us again next Monday, and please help spread the word by clicking like and share below. Thanks, David. We'll see you next week.
We'll see you next week.